Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Over the last 4 years, there's been rapid advancement in the U.S. and Zambia bilateral cooperation surrounding critical minerals. Zambia is one of the fastest growing copper producers in the world. And in the last few years, the U.S. has signed a trilateral cooperation agreement with the DRC, Zambia, the U.S. We've seen the United States open up one of its only commercial offices at the U.S. Embassy at Lusaka on the entire African continent. And we've seen companies like Cobalt take front and center stage in terms of advancing U.S. mineral security needs. This cooperation has been anchored by both private sector cooperation and strong government-to-government cooperation. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Zambian Ambassador Chibamba Kanyama here to the United States, along with Jito Kayumba, who is a special assistant to the President of Zambia for Finance and Investment. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ambassador, I want to turn to you first. One of the flagship engagements between the U.S. and Zambia has been the Lobito Corridor. The Lobito Corridor connects Zambia, Angola, and the DRC. Prior to this Fireside, we were talking about how important the Lobito Corridor is to creating the mining ecosystem. So not just the mine, but delivering a more mutually beneficial model of mining, which is really what Zambia wants. Can you tell me a little bit more about the Lobito Corridor?
Yeah, first of all, it's an investment that is not feasibility study. Feasibility has been done, completed, and may cost about $4 billion in the first phase. And we actually connect the Indian Ocean as well through the Tazara. And that was not initially planned, but it looks like we can connect the railway line from Lobito all the way to Tanzania. So we're actually talking about 4 countries now. It's Angola, DRC, Zambia, and now Tanzania coming on board. And we saw President Biden in Angola last week, which was a big statement for the continent, and came as a very huge assurance to the U.S. investors that the U.S. is now ready to go onto the continent big swing. The Lobito Corridor is a single largest U.S. infrastructure investment in Africa, and comes at a time where the U.S. is really talking about new entry points on the continent. And fortunately, Zambia is among those countries to benefit from that. So, like you have indicated, the Lobito Corridor is not just about the railway line. It's about ecosystems, about the other services and investment, including infrastructure investments that will happen around the Lobito Corridor. And this becomes an attraction for investments in energy, investments in banking, investments in telecommunications, investments in all other key services. And we're already seeing front runners in the energy sector around the Lobito Corridor, such that this infrastructure investment around the Lobito Corridor will enhance service provision. So that if you're going to talk about beneficiation, value addition, you are not worried about where to tap other services to facilitate this. But the major thing for me is that most U.S. Companies have complained about 2 things, about transparency. So it addresses the issue of transparency. Africa has really been known to be kind of corrupt to access services. This is a transparent investment. Whoever goes in there should know that it's an open book. Everything will be transparent. And number 2, the major concern about U.S. investors into Africa, Zambia, is about the risk levels. To me, this is a de-risking at a sovereign level. And the U.S. entry into that part of the continent is an assurance to other investors from the USA that one component of potential risk in investing in Africa, in Zambia, in Angola, and DRC has been dealt with. It will also be one way of reducing the cost of doing business.
I think that's a really important point, that once government involvement at that level is there, there's a confidence from the private sector that due diligence has been done.
Absolutely, because you cannot just go into there without having done the due diligence. So there has been some cleaning up. A lot of players have been involved. We're talking about the African Finance Corporation, talking about African Development Bank, talking about the involvement of the European Union. So, and above all, talking about the U.S. government itself, DFC, and many other players. They cannot just go there and put and commit such huge resources without having done their homework. So there has been significant due diligence undertaken, such that now when we are inviting private sector players to come onto the scene to do all kinds of investments, the major part of the risking has been done, and the reports are there to access what is the potential to invest in any other sector around the Lobito Corridor. So that is open book. It's available. You can check it, and it's a welcome move. Absolutely.
Ambassador Kanyama, you highlighted the importance of the private sector coming in. Jito, Zambia is, there's many fascinating things about Zambia. In the last 3 years, you've gotten more investment in the mining industry than the 30 years prior. You've had investment coming in, significant amounts of investment from Indian companies, from the UAE, from an American firm, from various European firms. What is making Zambia this star investment attractor, and what policies in the since President Hichilema has taken office have positioned it to attract that level of investment?
Thanks, Gracelin. What anchors our attractiveness right now is really the president. I think he, coming from the private sector himself, being someone who's well versed in understanding investments, creating an atmosphere that does create that environment for greater investor attractiveness, is really coming out of course, the fact of the matter is, he's someone who, when he began to engage investors on the world stage, he took the scene by storm, where many got to see for the first time in many years an African leader who understands the mindset of an investor. What are the factors associated with risk profiling? Factors associated with the ideal policies that allow for investment to take place, the formation of institutions within the Zambian government system, like the Private-Public Dialogue Forum, like multiple entities that essentially allow for ease of engagement of the private sector with the government in Zambia, and naturally moving on into not only taking the consultative process, the advice that they bring, and implementing that in a very aggressive manner. And that, naturally has brought about enormous excitement. And of course, you've had a lot of investors doubling down on various investments that they've done historically in the country, but then also some of the new investors who've come on board have also been, investors who've actually never, had an interest in Zambia, but now do. So we're grateful for that. And I think also, investors are creatures of habit. When they see a fellow investor within any jurisdiction come into a country like Zambia, it actually piques their interest. Why is the group out of the UAE coming in when they've actually never invested in any African asset before? Why is Cobalt coming in? Why is any other country coming in within the mining sector or any other sector? That also has sort of created some degree of momentum, adding to what the ambassador said around the de-risking levels or the platform that even the Lobito Corridor has presented, that has also sort of spun other entities coming through. So I would say that's among many reasons why there's so much excitement around Zambia right now.
So let's look to the future. President Hichilema has come in the last few years, really cleaned up the policy environment, cleaned up some of the corruption that you were alluding to earlier to make it that pro-investor, environment. Yeah. But unlike a country like China, most of us have elections every year, and there is a concern around investors that elections could change things. And investors, in a way, calculate kind of when they're thinking about their net present value through today's policy environment, right? So when I'm looking longer term and I'm bringing patient capital in as an investor, I'm looking at a horizon of anywhere from 30 to potentially 70 years. What is Zambia's policy environment right now? There are some proposed changes that are being discussed that we've heard government and the private sector discuss. Can you give us a little bit of insight into the policy landscape now and potential policies looking ahead?
So right now, the policy environment is deliberately stable. It's stable to ensure that you can plan over a long period of time, like the period that you've alluded to. I think that's a huge priority to this government. And what was changed when the time the president came in was really coming out of consultation. I think I make mention on that because of the fact that before you make any changes to any policy, you have to engage the stakeholders who that policy will essentially impact. And the first change was really on the fiscal side from the mining perspective, and that was well received. And that it it led to entities like First Quantum Minerals to double down and invest an additional 1.3 billion that expanded the existing mine that they have in Kansanshi, and then also create the largest nickel mine on the continent. So we're very excited about that. Now, on the aspect of concerns, we've heard a lot of misconceptions around what Zambia is intending on doing with regards to mining policy, issues relating to free carry, issues relating to, in terms of shareholding in the mining sector, local content, the fiscal structure, and the like. The reality is nothing will essentially take place with there being a robust engagement that allows for that feedback to come through in order for people to feel more comfortable. So I'll start with the local context aspect. When you look at the fact that the continent of Africa is largely young people, and there's a huge aspiration on these young people to essentially have more benefits from the mining sector. And of course, that has to be addressed and articulated in a way that essentially has a harmonious approach from the side of the investors and the side of the Zambian people. So when it comes to local content from a supply chain perspective, we just want to make sure that not only is capacity there among Zambians and access to capital and for them to be able to be within the supply chain, we want to make sure that there's an agreement on what portion of the supply chain is given to Zambians in a consultative manner. It's not one that is imposed in a draconian fashion. I think this is something that many investors can attest to in terms of how that discussion has been had. And we're moving on with that. The second is on free carry. We are, as people who understand corporate structures, corporate finance, we're not people who want to take shares. We don't appropriate assets. We've already shown, we've demonstrated in a very clear way. If you look at the interventions we've done on KCM and a few others, where there was an erroneous acquisition of shares on the part of government in a private entity, we restored that. So that already tells you where our minds are. We want to make sure that every dollar an investor puts into the country is associated with what they've structured within their model, and also in a way that has due recognition for the risk factor as well as the correlation with the shareholding and the valuations. So when we come in as government or through our private sector entities, whether it be the IDC or ZCCM, IH, these are holding companies that are owned by government, to have access to these entities, we're coming in as an investor as well, not to take. So the fact of the matter is, if we are going to have an enhanced shareholding in any entity, we want to essentially meet at the commercial negotiating table with skin in the game through an actual investment. Number two, where we have a situation where there is a discussion around shareholding is where we bring additional value beyond the capital. It's where we have tenements. Tenements that sit within the Zambian government in terms of ownership, and we have a valuation of those tenements, and we're actually investing in exploration. You've heard the engagement of Excalibur, who are currently doing a survey, a geophysical aerial survey in Zambia, and the report will essentially lead to a situation where you can now value the quality of a certain mineral tenement, and we can bring that to the table as our equity and negotiate on that basis. So this is really one that is alive to all the factors around best practices, corporate structures, corporate finance, which we will certainly bring to the table. So that should not be a concern for investors. In fact, if anything, we're adding value. We're not taking anything from any existing entities. We're actually bringing new entities, new assets, new tenements that we can essentially engage investors who are interested in the sector on. And of course, we really want to make sure that we continue to consult, we continue to engage in a way that before any new policy is put in place, we've had that robust conversation. And these are ongoing. So that's the assurance we want to share with the investor community.
I think that's really important. I mean, mining, again, going back to being that long-term investment, investors don't expect policies to stay the same for 80 years.
Yeah, of course.
Right, but they do expect a recent tenure of stability. But importantly, to address that, I mean, globally, we've seen that tension between mining companies, communities, workers, really simmer to the top, and that consultative, ongoing engagement is vital for preventing kind of a little bit of a blow up.
And just to add on that, just the further assurance, we should expect that every fiscal year there may be some kind of realignments on policy. These are more administrative, not to take away, but to enhance the attractiveness of a country in terms of investment. That should be expected. realize that's a long time with patient capital involved, with returns expected 15, 20 years from now. One, for American investors, we should be aware that you have Exim Bank, you've got DFC, that may actually guarantee some of the investment that you take to Africa. And as embassy, we do actually collaborate with these institutions to ensure that in case of potential policy reversal, after you have committed resources and capital, you still get compensated. But we, as a country, are not relying on that. We're also guaranteeing certain things, because once you get involved into an investment activity in our country like Zambia, you get assurance that even if there is administrative change, there should never be significant changes to the investment climate. We want to ensure stability. If there's any drastic change or policy reversal on anything, you get compensated for that. And no administration will want to mess up with that. So that there shall be kind of like a bipartisan, and that's the language that you use, a bipartisan agreement on some of the incentives that are given to mining companies. I mean, the major thing that happened, like Jito said, in 2021 when the government came into power, was to listen to the private sector, mining companies. Why is it that we are not as attractive as we should have been as a country? So there are drastic policy pronouncements that citizens may not have been very happy with. And the government took a huge risk and a huge gamble to, for example, make mining royalties tax deductible. In other words, to even up so that whatever is prevailing in Chile, prevailing in Peru or Russia, whatever prevails in Zambia. So it's to even the playground for fiscal incentives. And that should continue without any fear that at any one point there shall be policy reversal on that. That is guaranteed. And all we're expecting from private sector is just understand what is happening and take advantage of it.
I think that point is really important about leveling the playing field with other jurisdictions to making sure they're competitive. Sometimes we end up in the wrong mentality that it's a race to the bottom. I don't think it's a race to the bottom. I think it's about creating an even competitive field amongst major mining jurisdictions. But the fact that you're thinking about what is Chile doing or what is Peru doing is a really, I think, powerful signal of saying we need to learn from our peers. Sometimes we end up in a like a little bit of a myopic, like we're the only player here. You know, I think that's really important. So one of the things I want to turn to is one of the challenges we see in mining in emerging markets is the energy shortage. Mining is an extremely energy intensive field. I remember a few years ago when I lived in South Africa, mining was already taking up 29% of South Africa's energy grid. And we know that Zambia, there's a lot of hydroelectric power. There was a drought, you saw that energy you saw that deficit come in. And energy shortages in general, not having universal energy to access, can increase tension between mining companies and communities, right? Because it's a significant energy user. But number two, it's, wait, great, you're good at getting metals, you know, for the global energy transition, but I don't have access to energy here at home. So I'm interested a little bit more in terms of what is the energy investment landscape? Is this a room for, you know, increased cooperation between the U.S. and its allies and Zambia? I think back to how important Obama's Power Africa initiative was, which has stayed through the first Trump administration, through the Biden administration. How can the U.S. engage on the power front?
I'm sure Jito will say something on that because a lot has taken place in the past 1 year, which we didn't anticipate some years back because we really were reliant on hydropower. We never anticipated there could be a moment where there'd be huge deficit in energy arising from climate change. And the significant thing right now is how, because of policy incentives pronounced this year, the response levels very encouraging. And Jito will talk about some of those initiatives. And we do realize that mining sectors consumes about 43%. Really, it's the major consumer of energy. But there have been some private sector initiatives as well by CEC. And maybe Jito may want to highlight on what's happening.
Sure. Thanks, Ambassador. You know, it's this time, I must mention, like you mentioned, hydroelectric power is 85% of our power generation. And with the drought that has taken place, it has eroded our capacity to generate electricity. There are blackouts, there are challenges, and the mining sector has certainly been affected. But this has been a lesson for us in terms of addressing, building resilient infrastructure that's climate agnostic, that essentially can stand the test of time. And as there has been more investment in the mining sector than in the last 30 or even more years, there will be more investment in the energy sector as well. The amount of solar investment is very significant. The pipeline through the Ministry of Energy is very clear in terms of the number of entities that are already at construction stage. You've got multiple who've reached financial close. You've had a legacy issue with our power utility that also has been addressed in a significant way. The liberalization of the energy sector has also been very robust and has created an attractive environment. And where the mining sector is not just a consumer, which draws on a significant, an appetite that somewhat diminishes the access to electricity for others, but is also an element in terms of de-risking. A lot of the new investors in the energy sector, and depending on power purchase agreements that are somewhat linked into the receivables or into the essentially coming from the mining sector. So they are adding value to enhance the ecosystem around energy. And that is growing. And we are targeting to ensure that the deficit is not only addressed, but we get to a point where we have a significant surplus and one that is not dependent in a significant way on hydro. And we have a target before the end of 2026. We'll certainly have, if I were to count the number of existing processes in place in terms of construction or entities that reach financial close, we're talking about adding another 2,500 megawatts of electricity with more to come. And I'm only talking about generation. There's interconnection infrastructure being built between Zambia and Tanzania because Tanzania has a surplus, so we have an option from an import perspective. We have options also associated within the power trading space. The liberalization I was talking about really allows for any one entity to not only procure power from anywhere or produce it and sell it into the grid and have a bilateral arrangement without even working through the power utility, but with a corporate or an industrial entity. So all of that is strengthening the environment around energy. And then, of course, the mining companies themselves are coming along with captive solutions. We know that First Quantum Minerals, Mopani, which is through IRH, are also coming with their own captive infrastructure for their power needs. So that all is ensuring that we do have a platform that is more reliable around electricity.
I'd just to add one thing, that from the U.S. perspective, there is a lot of interest to actually participate in the energy generation sector in Zambia. Just as I was coming to this studio, we had some text and messages from Lema Energy, which is based in Minnesota. They want to power part of Zambia in solar energy. We've been having some discussions for about 6 months now. So this is an interest from the U.S. Companies. The major drawback from companies from here and maybe elsewhere is that we have gone through a phase of debt, external debt, and that affected our sovereign rating as a country. So that most of these companies that are seeking to source finances to invest in Africa in energy sector are having boardroom challenges where the directors are asking, look, if we do some kind of investment, we have to source this capital, but your risk profile is not very attractive as a country, so you must manage that. But because of what has happened now, we have restructured our debt, we're becoming much more attractive now, so that risk, the fear of getting to the boardrooms and mobilizing capital resources from private sector for companies here to invest is kind of managed now. So our risk rating has improved.
I think that's a really important point. Zambia was the first country in the pandemic to default on its debt.
Yeah.
But the turnaround story of the last 4 years has not been nothing short of remarkable.
Yeah.
To go from defaulting on debt to attracting this level of investment, really, you can't pay off all your debt overnight, but it is a powerful testament to the policy reforms undertaken to build the market confidence into a better outlook going forward. And that is actually going to segue me into my next question, which is, that is a very powerful reminder of why the mining sector can be used for good. Right. Often the mining sector historically has gotten a very bad reputation, particularly in emerging economies, right, for the notion of kind of a resource nationalism. You take, you send to the, no one else benefits from it. But this is a good example, again, of how you are creating the necessary reforms. But how do we make sure, and this is the big mining question, that all Zambians are better off for having these resources? Because ultimately, Zambia's got a huge youth population, a growing population. There's a jobs challenge. There is an infrastructure challenge. How do we ensure that the mining sector supports economic transformation in the years to come?
We have no doubt that the mining sector will be a massive contributor to the next phase of our economic growth. And this is anchored on one thing as a start, and that is the 3 million metric ton target. Because what that means, even from a revenue perspective for the Treasury, is significant. 40% of our revenue as a Treasury does come from the mining sector. And right now you've got a situation where, in fact, our average around the production has been hovering between 600,000 to 700,000 metric tons on an annual basis. We're moving to a point where by the time we're getting to the end of next year, we could be exceeding 900,000 metric tons. I'll give you a bit of background around the best economic year in our history was around 2008, 2009, where we were doing 800,000 metric tons. The copper price was around $10,000 a ton. Now we're in a situation where we're moving back into that level from a price perspective, and from a production perspective, we're exceeding it. That essentially tells you a story around how important the sector is to the country. And in terms of the pipeline of not only investment to attain these incredible numbers, in fact, there was a lot of doubt, a lot of talk around, can we achieve 3 million metric tons? The reality is we can list mine by mine, not only new mines that are going into production, but existing mines that are enhancing their production. And of course, the greenfields that are being discovered through the government and of course work in partnership with the private sector are taking us to a point where we can exceed that target post 2031, because the target was based on a 10-year period from 2021 up to 2031. So we know we're going to exceed it. Now what that means is that, if you look at countries that have transformed their economies, particularly in the Middle East, countries like the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they were able to leverage adequately a natural resource into wealth for the country, to diversify the economy. So what we're looking at is, with the enhanced revenues that we'll be receiving from the mining sector, I talked about the Treasury aspect. Now moving into the aspect of where we are shareholders in these mines. And again, I mentioned shareholders not by taking, but by investing, acquiring those shares in a legitimate manner, in a corporate structure, negotiated and acquired properly, but also the greenfields that we are funding through our exploration processes, through our investments, through our partnerships, are essentially going to give the Zambian government, through their sovereign wealth enterprises like IDC, Industrial Development Corporation, it means that we've also got access to the revenues. I mean, we're talking about the profits of those mining entities. But beyond that, you're talking about the value addition that's associated with that, and eventually the trading platforms. This is another piece that has gotten a lot of excitement around Zambia, is that we're not coming to disrupt the ecosystem around trading, is that we actually want to participate in partnership with the commodity traders to ensure that we also get margin off that. Because the revenue from tax is not sufficient. We also want to make sure that we're getting the dividends, we're getting margins off the trading. All of this will lead to enhanced revenues for the Zambian people, who right now, through the president, are going to school for free. It's the first time in the history of our country. We have a situation also where local communities, in a highly equitable manner, are receiving over $1 million per constituency to essentially, as part of our decentralization strategy, to bring development to parts of the country that they've never received before. And now imagine with quadrupling mining revenues, what does that mean for a Zambian? Already the Treasury is already spreading the wealth, if you will. And that essentially will impact your everyday Zambian in a very significant way. So Zambians are very excited about this. Even, of course, the list is endless in terms of benefits, the employment, the downstream activities that are associated, the supply chain. It's really significant. You're talking about an additional $30 billion or so of revenues coming into the Treasury system, into the government as a result of this. And of course, that does lead into other factors. We talk about the Lobito Corridor, talk about the other supporting industries, the energy and so on. So the impact is massive.
So, I mean, I think that's exactly it. It's taking that money and investing it into the human capital, the physical capital, the natural capital. You know, if you're making school free now for a 5-year-old and they stay in free school keeps them in school for the next, 13 years, right? You're going to realize those benefits for the next 70 years, potentially, right? And that's exactly the narrative to turning it around and ensuring that natural resources are harnessed for positive economic transformation.
Yeah, and I'm actually just one quick point. I'm personally impressed as ambassador. I'm very impressed with the cobalt model. He made mention of cobalt in Zambia, the investment. Of course, it's signaling something to the market here and elsewhere about the attractiveness of our market. But the most important thing is how they have done it. They haven't yet started producing. I think they have got four years or so to go before they do that. But just within this period of time, they already have from 30 to 300 employees. They are committing resources, over 2 billion to be committed over, I think, in the next phase. Who have they hired? And I think to me, this is the major message I'm spreading to investors in the USA. Unlike before, where a mining company comes in and brings all its technical staff from its home country, they are tapping into the host country where they can find highly competent technical resources. And Cobalt has done that. The top management of Cobalt in Zambia is run by Zambians. These are highly competent, highly trained, well-trained individuals. To me, that is the value that we want to see. If you're going to talk about the benefit to the local economy, one is how much do you tap into the local skills? How much capacity building do you do? So they're actually working with Sanford University, with University of Zambia, Cobalt University, to train local people, building capacity in country. To me, that is the model which people appreciate. Once they see that, they're happy with it. And there's much more other corporate social responsibilities that they're already involved in. Even before they take $1 out of their investment, they're already committing in corporate social responsibility within the Chilabombwe area.
And that's also really important to reducing the risk of policy volatility.
Absolutely.
Policy volatility in mining is often a result of a government, a community, a group of people feeling like they are not deriving benefits from this industry.
Exactly.
So the second, it's training a generation of people, it's making school free, it's building that energy infrastructure. People start to be, we're benefiting from these policies. We don't want to create policies that may encourage divestment or a reduction in investment over time. That's really important. I just want to wrap up with 2 questions. So one of the questions came in from online, which is, what is the timeline for the geological mapping that you discussed? Because that's the future of investment. If I want to go to greenfield investment, it's dependent on that. So what's the timeline for that?
Phase 1, we'll essentially be able to publicize in January. We want to make sure that by the time we get into of course, we're entering a season where you have a lot of mining conferences in Cape Town and Saudi Arabia. We want to be able to come to the investment community there to say, here we are, we've found X amount in the first phase, which covers a specific part of the country, and this will continue throughout 2025 going into 2026. So it's already begun, and investors could be excited to be positioned for us to begin to engage on the basis of what we've discovered. So that's the timeline.
Fantastic. And my final question to wrap up is, looking ahead, we have a new administration coming in here in the U.S. It is an administration that a lot of their work that is going on in Africa actually started during the first Trump administration, which I think is a really powerful signal of the priority of the region, the priority of the mining industry. Do you see any more, is there any room for collaboration that you think would be particularly strategic?
Absolutely. Perhaps I don't know.
Let me start with, and then you can conclude. Sure. Very much. Initially, we were anxious about the change of administration initially, but after much discussions and collaboration, we realized there's actually good potential for us. We know the new administration, President-elect Trump, believes in negotiations, in deals, and business. He may not really want to enhance the aid side, aiding whatever free money going to Zambia. He wants business deals. So we have got something to offer. It's really a win-win. We have to offer the U.S. something, and they have to offer something. It should be on the table of discussions and negotiations, and I believe the mining area is one low-lying fruit for us to engage with the discussions. And I'm very confident that there will be no distraction or change to the Lobito Corridor Project. It will continue. And so that's where we see huge potential for the next regime.
We have no doubt that Zambia continues to be a strategic partner to the U.S., regardless of which administration is in place, because of a number of factors. We have numerous shared values, our democracy, our long-standing relationship, but then also the shared interest within the critical mineral space, and Zambia being a very important player within that space. And given the fact that, you know, strategic to the U.S.'s own interests around securing these minerals, and this is ultimately part of what Lobito Corridor does, is that it does provide ease of access. Of course, our partnerships are very clear and are moving very far along with Cobalt, of course, the Lobito Corridor as well. And ultimately, we recognize that the shared interests within that particular space will derive mutual benefits. And as the ambassador states, what's important to us is that we don't need aid to a significant extent. What we need is trade. We need partnerships. We need investments. And we are positioning ourselves as being a relevant player within that ecosystem. And we want not only to work with the administration that's coming in, as we've enjoyed warm ties with the administration that's outgoing. We look at it as a relationship with the American people that is really here to stay. And with that, our positioning, our engagements are very deliberate in that particular manner. And we, as Ambassador states, we are excited and looking forward to how this is nurtured even more and derives significant value.
And speaking to that end, I mean, Zambia's big commodity is copper, and copper is really what we need to power the future of the modern economy.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we've thought about critical minerals only through a decarbonization lens. Copper is the second most used weight in defense technology by weight. It is what is going to build that power transmission infrastructure that you need for data centers to meet artificial intelligence needs. So copper is also the most cross-cutting commodity when I think about national security, economic competitiveness, and of course still energy security, you know, there's no way around it. And I think that's also going to be a very big part of stimulating that economy in the U.S. and abroad. And on that is, the second part I just want to add is also, Zambia has been a great success story of the regional integration narrative and the power of regional integration. Africa's not always been the easiest continent to facilitate regional integration on. But, you know, even since signing the African Continental Free Trade Area, this corridor really stands to be a powerful demonstration project of what happens with cooperation. So some of the things I'm most excited about are there. And then wrapping up on commercial diplomacy. This is all at the heart of U.S. Zambia commercial diplomacy. And I think building it around minerals is going to be a really key feature of the next, of not just the next 4 years, and years to come.
Absolutely.
Because critical minerals are not a 4-year challenge. So on that note, Ambassador Kanyama, Jito, thank you so much for joining us from Washington, from Lusaka. It's been such a pleasure. And thank you for your continued engagement with us. And thank you to all of you who have joined online, submitted your questions, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue about how the U.S. can better cooperate with our allies to meet our mineral security needs going forward. Thank you.